Brian, I would like to start out with a question that came up during one of our talks that I had with Mike McCauley, our business development manager for the UK. And that is, you both mentioned it, Ed and you, user experience platform, engagement of customers. Could you elaborate on the term lean UXP? That's also where Gartner puts it, lean user experience platform. And you said that there's a future, but you didn't really answer the question, why is this the future? Maybe you can speak to that.
Okay, I'll try to tackle the first one. So Gartner is bifurcating the portal market into what they call the lean portal and the user experience platform. The way I understand it is the user experience platform is intended to be anything and everything you need to do everything from enterprise integration through to the development of websites, mobile apps, web-based services. And so if you look at something like the WebSphere product portfolio, they're going to have everything from the app server and the database through to like service orchestration, the message bus, things like Tivoli, a lot of complexity which tends to be too much for, I would say, 80 to 90% of the use cases out there. But I think strictly speaking, that is a full user experience platform. They probably have their own options for a search engine, rules, business process management, and so forth. On the lean side of the house, you have vendors like maybe Backbase, or you might even consider WordPress a lean portal. It gives you kind of that basic functionality that you need to throw up a website or a portal. It may not have as much sort of portal foundation for doing integration, for doing more sophisticated user management and profile management. And so Liferay, if you've looked at how we've developed the product in the past, we've given you pretty good, sometimes just good enough, sometimes pretty good, sometimes pretty awesome functionality in maybe 8 or 9 different areas. Everything from workflow to content management to social collaboration. We need to add to that things like workflow and analytics, some reporting capabilities, to arrive at what I'm calling the lean UXP. I expect most of our customers will find it easier to use Liferay out of the box as an integrated solution, but then pick those 1 or 2 areas. Maybe it's a shopping functionality, commerce, maybe it's a more sophisticated workflow engine to go really deep. And so you get sort of a T-shape where you can leverage most of the good enough functionality, not deal with the complexities of integration, and then also have the architecture in place to go really deep in the areas that you need to.
Okay. So now, Gavin, you are building one of these UXPs. Phase 1 is complete, as I understand it. Phase 2 is on the way. And that might be specific to the portal or to the project market in government, but I don't think so. IT projects are really difficult to fulfill. Some of them fail. Could you share like 1 or 2 things that you learned building UXP as you presented it this morning, and how you maybe avoid pitfalls?
Sharing 1 or 2 things is difficult. Which ones to choose? So I guess we had an interesting conversation actually earlier in the table session around decisions that you make when you start out, and the kind of enterprise architecture approach of driving down from kind of capabilities you need as an organization leads you to think that you maybe need a set of building blocks, and you're often thinking about a sort of service-oriented architecture approach where you have loose coupled services connecting across multiple different product lines, and you end up with this architecture which looks kind of conceptually right, and then you start from the user-centric end, you start from user needs, and you're thinking about actually, what do you really need to deliver this particular piece of work? And as you really start to embrace, the new digital possibilities, you start to realize that some of the layers that you would have thought you needed conceptually, 3-4 years back, aren't necessary, and that actually you can start stripping some of that stuff back. So you make decisions as you're going through the project to simplify where possible. And so we've taken various pieces out, or we've made choices to, which elements of the architecture are really critical, which do we want to retain, and which pieces can we simplify and do away with, usually in pursuit of that simplified user experience. And so I think that's one of the key things. So I suppose an example would be, we talked about workflow earlier on. So we originally expected to use our workflow engine behind the scenes, but in the end we just didn't need it. We could do so much with the digital services through the forms that we didn't really need to hand work around inside the organization. Yeah, so that's one example of where we, and actually think being alive to that opportunity and that design, and listening to what you're being told by the user stories that you're developing, and really kind of being willing to work in an agile way and to take those decisions on the fly are really important. And you then need to work back into your architecture. What does that mean? And obviously having something that's kind of open and that can support that sort of flexibility and change is really important. So I guess that's why it's worked.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Paul, I want to ask you, I'm not sure if you have a mic here. Mic. I want to ask you, you're on the other side, you're a partner, Liferay partner. From your perspective, what makes a Liferay project successful? And maybe I'm looking, maybe if you have a story to say, this was a common pitfall, or this is how things go with other projects or vendors, and this is what Liferay does, or this is what we experience with Liferay.
Thanks for your question. Right. I think what I'd like to say against that is that everything I've heard before I came today and what I've heard today about where Liferay is and where it's going is very positive as far as we're concerned as a partner. I think probably for all the partners here, I think you're getting the strategy of your product development right. And the reason I say that is because it leaves a lot of space for a lot of creative things to happen which add value to your base product. And I think that's very important when you start looking at customers and customer needs, that customers actually got a lot of choice out there to pick and choose the bits that he needs to add to the basic infrastructure of Liferay. So, we're in the business of adding value to Liferay, as I guess all the partners who've been here this week are. We're all coming at it from slightly different directions, but the one thing that's consistent is that we've got a nice clean interface to work to. We've got some nice tools which to deploy with, and I guess where it can go wrong sometimes is in a situation where you maybe just don't have quite enough tools in the kit bag to do exactly what the customer is requiring, and you have to just go around the edge a little bit. But I think that's getting less and less, and having a look forward at Liferay 7 there, some of the things that we've been doing around the edge, as it were, on the mobile, you're covering off there. So I think we're very happy that Liferay is a great platform to do developments with customers, and it gives customers a great amount of choice in terms of the direction they take and who they partner up with at the end of the day to develop their Liferay experience.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I want to open this up to our customers, or anybody really, because the decision to build or restructure, and step back from the project, the decision is made in different departments. And we have developers here, we have somebody with a lot of experience in the banking industry, project management, etc. From your guys' perspective, who's the best person to be the ambassador to drive a Liferay project? Maybe Ian, you can start.
I was hoping you were going to pick on that. Who would be the best ambassador? I think it ultimately depends upon the organisation. If I think about some of the organisations I've worked for, you take a very large bank, they're a big animal. The amount that they will spend on IT will dwarf what you'll see in most other organisations. I used to be the chief architect for Barclays. My application inventory was about 2,800 applications. They would spend 1.2 1.2 to 1.3 billion pounds a year on IT. That's an enormous undertaking. Most of it's mission critical. You get on the news if anything goes wrong, so they get very paranoid about a number of things. That's wildly different to to some of the examples we've seen here today. So I think it's about horses for courses. In that world, there is a long process, and frankly, they probably spend more time worrying about the process than the outcome. So you've got to deal with the politics of how a big organisation works. So it really isn't a one answer fits all. It really depends on where you're trying to do it.
Okay. Actually, I want to stay with that. So I once talked to one of your peers in the banking industry, a large bank in Germany, one of the largest banks in the world, and I asked them, they were using Liferay already on a small set, and then they implemented a big social intranet, and they didn't choose Liferay, they chose another vendor. And I asked him, why didn't you choose Liferay? You had experience already, and he mentioned exactly the same thing, right? Politics, etc., and governance. When it comes to the decision, and even maybe you can speak to the perception of open source, maybe in bigger enterprises. There's some people here who will sit here from bigger enterprises. There's some people here who are from smaller companies. You mentioned that actually, Ben, right? Kids sitting somewhere, programming open source, can we take it seriously? What is this discussion like to that subject right now in the decision making?
I think it's changed over the last few years. I think people have got smarter. Certainly, if you look in the banking world, when I first went there, open source was, you get the garlic and the cross out because of a lot of perceived risk. The risk isn't in reality there. It's just not a problem at that sort of issue. So once they've learned it, once they've understood it, then they can take it on board, and you will see, certainly by the time I left Barclays, we were using things like Black Duck to look through what we were doing to make sure we hadn't ingested stuff we shouldn't have done. So I think you could say they've moved from a world where they wouldn't touch it to a world where they're having to worry now about actually potentially taking things they shouldn't have taken. But they're not going to stand up and make a big noise about it. That's the nature of that particular set of companies.
I see. Okay.
Different enterprises will make a virtue of different things.
Okay. So I know you were making, yeah, exactly. I wanted to ask you, Ben, how did you know?
I think we're the exact opposite of the banking industry, really. We were allowed to select the tools we used because we're a small development team. We had support from our managers, and the fact that it was open source was just a bonus. We selected Liferay, we went with it, and we got support from the management. The fact that it's now we've got an enterprise edition and it's supported is another tick in the box. There is no risk, and it's provided other advantages that future projects that rely on open source software will be able to push forward a lot easier. We're looking at moving away from a lot more proprietary systems and proprietary back-end systems as well, even databases into open source, and it's made that a lot easier for us. And the fact that we could select the tool made it easiest for it to develop on as well. So it's been very helpful for us.
Okay, cool. Okay, my next question that I have here is, how does a Liferay compare to other portal solutions in the market? I imagine some people are here who are maybe evaluating, maybe looking, maybe you guys are in the final stages, but still need to talk to the team, maybe to the decision makers. Gavin, could you talk to that? Did you guys have like an evaluation, and how did you arrive at Liferay?
That's actually kind of tricky for me to talk about because A, it was quite a while ago, and B, a lot of the work was done actually by the suppliers we were working with, Digerati and Co. We did go through a process, and actually it winds back 2 or 3 years to looking at the commercial market initially, where we had things like Oracle Web Center and proprietary content management systems proposed for very high prices that we rejected, and then making choices around adopting a basic content management system and going for open source and going for Drupal in that case, and then about a year and a half ago, deciding that it was time to tackle the question around the other benefits that a more formal portal platform could bring us. And we didn't actually, partly, we didn't want to go out and do a specific technology selection. We wanted to actually go out and talk to digital agencies about, and do a discovery phase about what were the needs we were trying to meet and what were the options for meeting those needs. And we didn't want to specify a technology other than it ought to be open. We did know about Liferay. We knew that Camden had used Liferay, and so there was a level of comfort, and we did mention Liferay as being a known product that should work for us. But we left it essentially open to the partners that we selected to look at what options there were to meet our needs. So I mean, we could have chosen a partner who was a big fan of Exoportal, for instance, or we could have chosen a partner that was using a commercial product, I guess. But actually, what it ended up with was working with a partner who then selected Liferay as the best fit to the needs that we were looking at, and it kind of moved on from there.
Okay. So we have a partner right here, right?
Correct.
Paul, when people come to you, right, and maybe ask and even drill down, right, how would you say, if I would come to you and say, hey, how does Liferay fit into your company's portfolio, and why do you think this would be the right solution for my portal, UXP, intranet, extranet, whatever they are building?
Okay, well, we've, in our existence, we've been suppliers of SAP, Vignette and its predecessor, OpenText, and a number of other proprietary portals. And a few years ago, we made a conscious decision to put all that to one side and to move into open source. And having evaluated what was on offer, our CTO, Matt Fulford, who's in the audience here, determined that Liferay was the right platform to go with. And my view of that at the time was one of, well, I had no idea whether that's right or wrong, but if you say it's right, you're the expert, let's go along with that. But since then, something that you mentioned, Brian, you said, you're not all things to all men, you're not an all-encompassing portal architecture. And that's a great place to be, because the problem with some of the proprietary products are they are just too big, just too complicated for the kind of stuff that the normal people in the world actually have to do. And we find that Liferay as a product is just in the right piece of space. It's not overcomplicated, and it's not too difficult for customers to get to grips with and to get hold of. And if we do need to do special or clever things, we can always add things to the side to produce a piece of functionality to do that. And it embraces us doing that. So I think, I just encourage you again to be what you are, which is in that piece of space, and to encourage your partners to, wherever and whenever they can, add value to that by producing particular solutions for particular markets and for particular add-ons for particular purposes, so that the large mass of customers which are out there can be serviced on the back of Liferay portal.
Okay. I want to add a thought. Not so much about Liferay, but about the relevance of open source to portals. And I think this point was actually raised by Jim Murphy, who's an analyst with Gartner. He said, one of the things that's most important to being a successful portal project is that you're connecting a lot of different systems together. And it's a lot harder to do that if you don't have at least open standards, but certainly open source helps. And it's also hard to do that if you've got sort of a full stack of products that you have some interest in pushing to your customers. So this isn't something specific or unique to Liferay, but I think generally any kind of independent open source portal vendor is going to do well in this kind of a scenario, because it behooves us to work as well as we can with as many different systems as we can. And of course, because the customers ultimately have the flexibility to connect with many other systems. If you work with something like SharePoint, by contrast, it works really, really well if you're committed to and invested in the entire Microsoft portfolio, including Exchange and Outlook and Office. But once you start to maybe try to plug other components in there, it falls over pretty quickly.
Okay. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about mobile. Ian, you mentioned you guys made a conscious decision not to build an app because you couldn't compete with the 1.3 million apps there. I want to ask the customers, maybe if you start from there this time, and then Ian, you finish, okay? If you have any mobile strategy, what is your mobile strategy, and how are you driving this subject forward?
Well, we decided sort of from the off that actually delivering a mobile app wasn't the right way to go, because you need to provide an experience that can work across any device at any time, because you don't know what operating system, or like iOS, Android, Windows Phone. There's so much. So many different devices in the market that you can't possibly create an application for each of those individual platforms. So the best way is to develop mobile first and develop it in a way that delivers content intelligently to the platform that you need. So a mobile, cut the content down in deliverable micro chunks that are easily digestible on the move is the best way to go for that. And then obviously you can move up for tablets and more so. And that way you reach more of an audience, because any device, your website or platform can be accessed.
Okay. Gavin, can you tell how many people are booking or going through this process with the residential parking from the mobile?
I don't actually know if we can tell how many are, but we simply built a web service. So again, exactly the same as you, mobile first, responsive design. So we built the web service, the app, as it were, for whatever device people have. So if you're using it on a phone, it's the same service as if you were using it on a tablet, as if you were using it on a web browser, on a desktop or a laptop. So I'm not sure whether we can tell. I can't kind of look at my technical people, but whether we can tell how many people are using it from a mobile or not. We probably can.
Okay.
But I haven't got the figures.
Okay, but do you have, what is your mobile strategy then? Like, even if they go on, you say, okay,
sure,
this is responsive design, or anything that you look ahead?
Our strategy is essentially to assume that the vast majority of people who will take up digital services will take it up on a mobile device.
Okay.
So we, for instance, did a piece of user research just recently with a group of people in the city who fall into a kind of an area with quite high need, often on the verge of homelessness, people whose lifestyles are beginning to be impacted by various things, pushing them into quite a chaotic situation. And what was interesting about that group of people was that pretty much all of them had smartphones, and quite a lot of them already did their, when you talked about the banking scenario, people checking for their housing benefit, and so that's that group of people. And so actually, if we're going to provide digital services even to that group of people, or especially to that group of people, you can probably rely on them having a smartphone, whereas you can't rely on them having access to a more traditional form of internet access. So yeah, definitely we're assuming that the vast majority of our services are the sorts of things that you want people to be able to access on a smartphone.
Okay.
I think to Ian's point about the proliferation of apps, I think this is a thought I've personally had. It's not necessarily a recommendation from Liferay, but I think increasingly we'll see the concept of disposable apps. For example, for most of you, after you leave the event today, unless you're going to attend one of our other events, you're probably going to delete it from your phone. And that's totally fine. And yet, was that app the best interface for the time to get, to convey the agenda information to you and then solicit feedback as far as which sessions were helpful? Perhaps. I think, so you can design at least into your overall app strategy, including mobile apps, that some of those apps are going to be very disposable. Gavin, in your case, you might have certain festivals that take place in your council, and then once it's over, it's over. But what you really want to keep from that experience is the data and understanding of the user, and again, to have that continuity across those interactions. So for Liferay, I think we want to support both. We want to make it really easy for you to rapidly create and deploy these disposable apps, whether mobile or web-based, and then to have that understanding that you get from it.
Okay. Yeah. Good thought. Ian, anything you want to add to the mobile discussion?
Yeah, I think it does ultimately boil down to what you're attempting to do, in your world. If you're simply pushing out information, then responsive design makes perfect sense. If the basic flow is essentially a form, filling it in, and your existing payment mechanism can support that model, absolutely it makes sense. Why go down that route? The point was, in my world, we have to do an awful lot more. In terms of security, if you look at the insides of most banking apps and the level of security that goes into it, it's a very interesting world. These things are obfuscated, they have trips and security controls and levels of sophistication that nobody else will need because you're not dealing with that sort of information, or very few people will need. It does, however, give them a number of advantages, in terms of essentially they can be much tighter around security, and they can do things like payment initiation and all the stuff that we want them to do. But that's very unique to them. The point I was making about the sort of the Darwinian life of the App Store was that when people talk about I want an app, don't decry the basic problem of how do I drive customer adoption. The cost of making people do it and pick it up is immense.
Okay.
I've got some numbers if anyone's interested. I won't quote them here, but it's a very large number. And even more interestingly is most of the traditional marketing methods don't work in that world. You can buy time on TV, you can buy radio adverts, and nobody will upload your app. There are other things that drive it, and you have to learn those mechanisms. So it's not a simple world.
Can you say one thing that drives? This is interesting to me from a marketing perspective. One thing that drives it. Like, of course, I can invest, and people will never see it.
Interestingly, it's the mechanisms within the app stores themselves. It's about what they put at the front actually drives a lot of people's behavior. Okay. And a surprisingly large amount. So the interesting conversation is in Cupertino or with Google.
I see. Okay.
I think, to some degree, I would agree in the sense that for the people who are kind of browsing for the latest kind of diversion as an app, they're definitely going to see what's in the featured section of the App Store. But I think to the extent that you're serving a niche need, like here at this Liferay event, you've got a Liferay specific app, then people are going to go out.
And the cute thing there is about finding a mechanism that allows people to do it quickly and easily.
Yeah.
And that's some of the tricks that I think haven't actually really come to the front yet.
Right.
Whether it be the very simple thing around prompting for the app, on a browser session, when you detect that you're actually on an iOS or an Android device, those are relatively simple things. Those can drive volume. But I think in a place like this, it's how do I find it, how do I get it? At the end of the day, there's certain things that bind us all together in our behaviors, and the biggest one is we're all lazy. Yeah. If I have to do anything to get something, I won't do it.
Well, if you're Bono, then you can just have it magically appear.
That's right, on every iPhone.
But as long as you remember that. Yeah.
Actually, Ian, something you said reminded me of something else, which is that in financial services, there are all of these sort of requirements around security and certification. I think up until now, at least in the conversations I've had about mobile strategy, it's really been about development approach, which one gives you maybe the more native user experience, and then which one gives you faster time to market. But I think maybe one big consideration to make is how much of control do you want to have over the content and application functionality? Because if it's all browser-based, you can turn on and off individual features whenever you want to. So the next time someone visits that website, they're not able to affect a certain transaction. Whereas if you have to manage the life cycles of multiple versions of mobile apps where, in version 1.1, you allowed someone to make an online payment, and in version 1.2, you want to take that away. Well, until everyone upgrades to 1.2, you're still going to have not only the ability to do that, but then on the back end, you're going to have to manage, receiving all of that data, actually executing those transactions for them. You have a little bit less control over the life cycle of the app than if you do it through the through the browser.
Yeah, and there are obvious mechanisms to force people to upgrade. There are ways and means to do a lot of that sort of stuff. So I think at the end of the day, a lot of that boils down to how the systems that sit beneath can actually cope with that variation as much as anything else. Yeah. Certainly from my experience, people tend to upgrade relatively fast in that app world. They tend not to lag behind. Frankly, the ones that lag behind are probably gone anyway.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. So speaking about apps, there's Ed mentioned that in his talk. There's a Liferay Marketplace, and we actually have two of the winners from the Marketplace contest this year are from the UK, and then there's another one that's from Finland. Arcus are also here. I want to ask the customers, if you guys have any, do you have any experiences with Marketplace? Can you speak to that, Ben, maybe, or Gavin? Anything you did there? Liferay Marketplace?
We've only used the Marketplace to download and install apps. We've found bits missing that we need to run on Liferay and then come to the Marketplace first. And then if not, we develop a hook or an extension.
Okay. Gavin?
No, we've not used it.
Okay.
We've not used it yet.
You guys? Okay. All right. Good. We have time for one more question. And I would like to direct it to you, Brian. So you mentioned in your presentation, Liferay is 10 years old. Now we're like getting into the teenage years as a company. Maybe less on a technological vision, but the company vision itself. Could you speak to that? What are you looking forward to in the next decade?
It's a very big question. I think, so I'll speak for myself. I think for-profit companies throughout history have had varying degrees of a sense of maybe civic duty to be contributors of value to society, to, certainly in their products and services, but also to be maybe examples for people to look up to. It's kind of the difference between, so there was a coach, John Wooden, UCLA basketball team, I believe back in the 80s, and it was all about sportsmanship. It was about, being a team player. It was about, if you have that sort of place of privilege, then you should take the responsibility of the fact that kids are looking up to you, you should act and behave in a certain way. Versus kind of the current era of Dennis Rodman, Kobe Bryant, where kind of the message is, once you make it to this level, you can kind of act and behave however you want to. You're kind of above the law. And maybe we're coming back from some of the excessive behavior of corporations, with 2008, or maybe people are just lying low for a few years until things pick back up again. So I think very simply for Liferay, I would like us to be one of many, many examples in the market of corporations that are sort of behaving in the classical way and not maybe the modern way. And asking that question constantly of how we can provide value back to our customers and employees. It's such a very basic and simple thing. It's not a revolutionary idea, but I think when more and more actors are able to do that consistently, do it well, and still run a profitable business, then I think we can have a pretty huge impact in society. So that's at a very, very high level what I'd like Liferay to continue moving towards. And if we can achieve that, I'd be very happy.
Okay. I hope that this gives you a little bit of a feel for what Liferay is as a company and who our partners are and also our customers. Our time is over now, so I thank everybody from the panel for investing the day, being here speaking, and also answering the questions. Thank you very much.